So moving back to our point number 2, which is sensitivity to changes in temperature and pH, we are saying that the cell membrane contains proteins which are adversely affected by extreme changes in temperature and pH. Such changes alter the structure of the membrane, hence hindering the normal functioning. So we have understood what pH is, but let us now go a step ahead. What will happen when the pH changes? Now, if this is the structure, I want to give you an example of a piece of meat. A piece of meat. People like meat. Now, compare the raw meat and cooked meat and a cooked piece of meat. Do they look the same? No, they don't. In terms of even structure. If you observe them closely, they do not look the same. Let me give you another example of a protein. Egg. People enjoy eating egg. Take that raw egg and compare it with the fried egg. Do they look the same? No. One is a solid, the fried one, and the raw one is a semi-solid. It is a colloidal kind of solution. So, what do we say? When you heat proteins, they change, their structure changes. Just like when you take egg and then you place in a hot oil, it solidifies. That is what happens to the cell membrane under different circumstances. When the temperature is too high, the cell membrane is destroyed. And if the cell membrane is destroyed, and last time we said, substances must move into the cell membrane, what will happen? The cell membrane cannot function. It will not allow glucose to get in and get into the mitochondria for respiration. It will not allow enzymes to come out. It will not allow water to get into the cell. It will not allow oxygen to get into the cell. Because the work of the cell membrane is to control the movement of substances into and outside the cell, and it must remain semi-permeable. So high temperature will destroy the structure of the cell membrane, just like high temperature will affect meat when you are cooking, because the cell membrane is made up of protein molecules. That's one. 2, the cell membrane is made up of proteins, and these proteins are made up of what we call amino acids. So, on the cell membrane we have amino acid molecules, which are components of the protein molecules. Amino acids normally change. The structure of amino acid is normally affected with the surrounding pH. Whether pH is low, meaning acidity, or pH is high, meaning basicity, the structure of the cell membrane will be affected. Now, we move on to the third point, which is our last point in this case. And in our last point, we are saying that the cell membrane is polarized. The cell membrane has a net positive charge to the outside and a net negative charge to the inside. Therefore, the cell membrane is polarized. Polarized. I want to simplify this term. Poles. From the term poles. Positive pole and negative pole. So, observing the structure of the cell membrane, the cell membrane is made up of lipid molecules, phospholipid molecules, like that. And if you analyze the structure of the cell membrane, you'll find that outside is positive. If this one was the cell, let's say this one was the cell that way. So we have it that way. So this is the outside, the outer part of the wall, the inner part of the wall. So to the outside, it is positive. The inner part is negative. So what happens? We say it is polarized because the cell membrane has both positive and negative charges. It is charged. It bears both the positive pole and the negative pole. So you say it is polarized. Now, how is this one important? The polarization of the cell membrane helps when it comes to the movement of ions, polar substances, like for example sodium ions. For these particles to move into the cell, if the cell membrane is not polarized, then these substances being polar cannot pass across. In other words, let me make it simple. A polarized substance will be attracted to a polarized body. Sodium ion, for example, we eat a lot of sodium chloride, salt, meaning we have sodium ions in our body. Why? Because they are important in the body. So what we say is that this sodium is a polar ion. Why? It contains a charge. It has a charge. And because it has a charge, what will happen? It will be attracted by the negative charges on the cell membrane. So the polarity, the polar nature of the cell membrane is advantageous because it will allow polar substances to pass across. And we have different polar substances apart from ions, mineral ions. Mineral ions are polar. We also have polar molecules. And these polar molecules, an example of a polar molecule is water. So the passage of water, though it's by osmosis, but is also assisted by the polarity of the wall of the cell membrane. So to summarize, we have looked at the three properties of the cell membrane. One, we have talked about semi-permeability, meaning it is semi-permeable or selectively permeable. It will select what gets into the cell and what is blocked. We have also talked of sensitivity to temperature, where we have said because the cell membrane is made up of proteins and protein molecules are sensitive to changes in temperature. Therefore, any change in temperature will affect the structure of the cell membrane. When the structure of the cell membrane is affected, then obviously the movement of substances into and out of the cell will also be affected. And then our last point was polarized in nature, meaning it bears both positive charge to the outside and negative charge to the inside. And this one is important because the charges affect the manner in which substances move into and out of the cell. And this property also enables the membrane to detect the changes in the environment. So because it is polar, it can detect whether the environment is positively charged or whether the environment is negatively charged. These are factors which help the organism to maintain a constant or a constant internal environment for its what? Survival. That one brings us to the end of our class. Thank you for watching. Let us meet in the Google Classroom.